Hey everybody, Jason Russell, Branch Manager, Caliber Home Loans. Hope you're having a terrific day. Wanted to record a video. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video, just talking a little bit about what happened in the market yesterday. There's not a ton of data going back prior to 2009 as far as daily mortgage rate fluctuations are concerned. But going back to 2009, I can say pretty confidently that yesterday was probably the worst one-day jump in mortgage rates in almost a decade. 2013 in the summer, there was a day in July that was pretty bad. That was comparable to this, but other than that, this was probably the worst day on record aside from that day. So let's talk about what happened. So on Friday, inflation reports came out and inflation was hotter than expected. We all know inflation's an issue. We go to the grocery store, we go to the gas pump. It's not a surprise, but the report came in hotter than even what was expected. And the thing to understand is that inflation is the absolute arch enemy of interest rates, and mortgage rates specifically is what I'll be focused on. All else equal, higher inflation means higher interest rates. And because the Federal Reserve is meeting tomorrow, Wednesday, they're in what's known as a blackout period. And what that means is they're not making any sort of public comments about the state of the economy, what the plan is going forward to fight inflation, etc. So this report comes out on Friday while the Fed is in this blackout period, and the market as a result has basically taken their imagination and run wild about what the Fed is going to do tomorrow at their meeting. Now, it's important to understand two things when it comes to the Fed and the idea of raising rates. First of all, let's talk about what the Fed's trying to do. The Fed right now is trying to do two things at once. Number one, they are trying to fight inflation, and the way they do that is by raising interest rates. And they're trying to do that while at the same time not causing a recession. So this is a very difficult needle to thread, but it's one that they've stated they're trying to do. So that's the first thing. The second thing to understand is that when the Fed raises rates, what they're raising is what's known as the federal funds rate. And the federal funds rate does not directly correlate to mortgage rates. Okay? The federal funds rate impacts things like home equity lines of credit, credit cards, things like that. But mortgage rates are impacted when the market changes its view of what the Fed is going to do, right? So they're the words that come from the Fed and how that impacts the market as a whole impacts mortgage rates. But if the Fed says I'm raising mortgage rate, or I'm raising the Fed funds rate by 50 basis points, mortgage rates do not go up 50 basis points with it. So prior to Friday's report, the Fed has publicly stated that their goal is to raise rates 50 basis points tomorrow, 50 basis points 6 weeks later in July, and 50 basis points 6 weeks after that when they meet in September. That's their stated goal. But when that inflation report came out and the Fed being in their blackout period, the market began to spiral and say, oh man, they're going to have to raise rates 75 basis points on Wednesday. And the thought being, if they raise rates 75 basis points, it's going to push the economy into a recession. So by having to raise rates 75 basis points, that idea of threading the needle, the two things they were trying to accomplish, they're not going to be able to do. And as a result, the market freaked out. I mean, history says they were never going to accomplish this anyway, but there were optimists in the market that were holding out hope. Well, yesterday was basically evidence that a lot of the people who were holding out hope were no longer hoping. So they started selling stocks. So stocks tumbled into what's known as a bear market. A bear market, in short, is when equity prices, things like stocks, for example, drop 20% from their highs. And so we are now into a technical bear market. Well, this caused additional mayhem in the treasury market. And one thing that mortgage rates are very closely tied to is what's known as the 10-year treasury yield. And that yield went from 3.05% at close of business on Thursday to 3.44% last I looked at it this morning. And that may just be a number to you, but that is a huge, huge, huge increase for 2 days. That's a massive increase. And since mortgage rates are closely tied to that 10-year Treasury yield, they came along for the ride. Mortgage rates on average, when markets closed on Thursday, were hanging around 5.5%. And at close of business yesterday, they were almost at 6.2% on average, right? That's a huge jump for a 48-hour window. Okay. So what happens next? We're really in uncharted territory, and my crystal ball is very, very cloudy. So you can take this with a grain of salt and forgive me for any inaccuracies in this, but I was originally very skeptical that the Federal Reserve would raise interest rates 75 basis points tomorrow. I felt like that Friday report, it was too soon for them to make such a big change in their stated policy. But then late last night, there was an article that was released in the Wall Street Journal, and there's some whispers that that was actually a leak from the Federal Reserve to prepare the markets that a 75 basis point increase is going to come tomorrow. So I'm beginning to think that they're going to do it. And I actually believe that them raising rates by 75 basis points is the smart and courageous thing to do. And I say that's courageous because it will almost, I don't want to say almost certainly, but it will very, very, very much likely push the economy officially into a recession. I think they're seeing enough data to suggest now, personally, that the economy is already in a recession. And so they're starting to give up this idea that they could thread that needle, and they're going to do what they have to do to just try and get inflation under control. And I think that candidly is the smart and courageous thing for them to do, because they're going to get a lot of blowback for it. The difficult part for the Fed is that a lot of the inflation is coming from two things that they cannot control, which is food and energy prices. People are going to have to eat regardless of what the Fed funds rate is. People are going to have to heat their home and drive their car regardless of what the Fed funds rate is. So the forces causing food and energy inflation are largely out of their control. So they're going to be focused on getting everything else down from an inflation standpoint, and hope that the supply chain issues, the Ukraine problem, all the things that are causing food and energy issues begin to wane, and that comes down with it. But they largely can't control that. So if we do get a 75 basis point jump tomorrow, it will show the market that the Fed means business in fighting inflation. And this should be a good thing for mortgage rates, because again, the arch enemy of a mortgage rate is inflation. So if the Fed is serious about fighting inflation, that should be a good sign as far as the mortgage market is concerned. All of us in real estate should be rooting for inflation to come down, because that will increase your client's buying power. They'll get better interest rate, lower mortgage payments, all good things, right? Now, I'm going to editorialize a bit here, but in my opinion, inflation is worse than a recession. If you got to choose one, you'd rather have the recession, because that's going to impact, unfortunately, a small subset of the population that loses their job in a recession. But inflation impacts those people plus the rest of the economy as a whole, right? But the worst possible scenario is when you have inflation and a recession at the same time, often referred to as stagflation. And so I think they're starting to see the light that, man, we might already be in a recession. So we got to get this inflation down fast before the recession actually truly hits on paper, so that we're not dealing with that stagflation problem. So if the Fed is ripping off the Band-Aid and hammering down inflation to do that, I think that is the best route forward. I was very skeptical that they would do it, but I really hope that they do. So what does that mean for you if you are in the real estate industry? Well, I think two things. One, you need to check in with every single one of your pre-approved buyers, and you need to check in with their lender, because if rates were 5.5% and now they're 6.2% on a $500,000 loan, that's about a $220 a month increase to their payment. One, we need to find out if your clients are comfortable with that and still moving forward. But two, if the lender maxed out their pre-approval, their purchasing power based on a specific payment, the higher interest rates has lost about $35,000 in purchasing power in 2 days. So you need to check and make sure that the buyers are aware and that your pre-approval is still good before you're making offers on homes that they can't qualify for or are comfortable affording. The second thing is that this mortgage rate information will largely not be covered by the news probably for another week and a half. And the reason I say that is most of the news organizations get their information on mortgage rates from the Freddie Mac survey that comes out weekly about average interest rates. And that survey is anywhere from 10 days to 14 days behind the reality of what's happening truly on the ground. And as we learned in March, the typical client was not up to speed on what happens when mortgage rates go up really fast. They were, clients would be upset that, hey, I got quoted a 5% by a loan officer that you referred. I thought rates were 3.875. Well, they were, but that was then. This is now. And because that news lags, we need to make sure that we're getting out in front of clients and sharing that information as much as possible so that they can make educated decisions on what they want to do with their financing and their purchase goals. So we want to be the local experts. That's why clients work with us and not an online lender or an online type service as an agent. So we want to get out there and provide them that information, which is why I felt like this video, being as long as it is a helpful and worthwhile one, so you could have the data that you need and the information you need to be that expert. So hopefully you found it helpful. Any questions, please reach out. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.